This episode of Climactic was recorded on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, whose sovereignty was never ceded. We wish to pay our respects to leaders past, present, and emerging, and we look to the traditional owners of this land, who lived in harmony with it for tens of thousands of years, as vital partners in returning to a sustainable way of life.
There are dire warnings that New South Wales will be hit by increasingly extreme weather.
2015 was the hottest year since climate records began.
Figures show this July was the single hottest month in recorded history.
Australia sweltered through its hottest spring on record.
Climate change is now affecting every country on every continent.
It's the rate that's of great concern.
And what do you put that rate down to?
Oh, it's human activity.
We have everything we need. Some still doubt that we have the will to act, but I say the will to act is itself a renewable resource.
Unless kids are really passionate about the environment and nature, they're not going to be motivated to go on and fix those real world problems. So that's what we're all about.
Hello and welcome to episode 53 of Climactic, the podcast collective for our climactic times. I'm Mark Spencer and I'll be your host for today's episode. If you love animals, you'll have a lot in common with this week's guest, Josh Cox, the founder of Reptile Encounters. Mobile zoos, bringing animals into classrooms, these aren't new ideas, but what Josh is doing with Reptile Encounters is new and very much needed. He's not only helping train a new generation of zookeepers, conservationists, and animal lovers in the proper ways of care, but bringing awareness of habitat loss and climate change to students, as well as cool animals to the classroom. It was a great pleasure to get to tour their facility before sitting down with Josh for this chat. And in the background, you'll hear one of the red-tailed black cockatoos occasionally chirping from the aviary. In this chat with Josh, we talk about the importance of a connection with nature, or even just exposure to the natural world. We talk extinctions, and the pace of the 6th mass extinction event we're living through right now, and causing as we change the world. It's hopeful, there is laughs, but it's also quite serious. So parents, if you're listening with your kids, just check in with them about how they're feeling after listening. All right, here we go with Josh Cox. So Josh, where are we right now?
Where are we? Reptile Encounters headquarters in Burwood. So we've been here for about 13 months now and getting the place set up with all our animals.
So as I came around the corner, walking down to the place, I see this bright lime green building, and I'm like, oh, that's definitely Reptile Encounters. And that's got to be a custom paint job because that's just perfect. But I understand this is how you found the joint.
It was, coincidental. So it was previously used for personal training, and I think they had an SAS theme. So the whole building was lime green, and the inside was full of artificial grass. So it kind of had a bit of a natural vibe, and it's an older structure, so it kind of feels a bit rustic.
And you said to really expand on that natural theme with then filling it with weird, wonderful, and delightful, cute invertebrates and furries and all sorts of stuff. So this really, you've created this jungle in this, well, it wasn't exactly nondescript looking commercial building before, but you really don't know what's in store for you as you walk up to this place. So high level, how many animals are in this building at sort of any one time? You've just given me the tour and I kind of lost count after a few dozen.
I had a guess. It's between maybe 250 to 300 animals. Just depends if you count all the smaller ones, all the invertebrates. But
where did this start? What was your first kind of... I assume you were a normal kid with a cat and a dog, or am I completely wrong?
It was probably the other way around. No, I started with the more peculiar. I think my first pet was either a budgerigar or a bunny rabbit. And I remember I had this budgerigar, Trixie, for probably 7 or 8 years, and she was tame, and at one point even flew away, disappeared, and playing cricket in the afternoon, and she flew down and landed on my shoulder as I was jumping the fence. So that was probably where it all started. It wasn't long before I was breeding rabbits and breeding guinea pigs and breeding budgies, and then I got into the reptiles. I had a pet turtle that I shared with a friend from primary school named Tetley. So we had this sort of timeshare arrangement with our turtle. We'd live at my house for a term, then we'd go to his house for a term. And that was sort of my first introduction to reptiles. And then I had some little newts that were quite cool, and fish and all the rest of it. So Yeah, there's always been, I guess, a background love of animals and nature, and always loved to be out in the garden looking for skinks and that type of thing.
So back to the first one, the budgerigar.
Yep.
And for the sake of all the other listeners who don't have an Australian accent like I do, who of course know what a budgerigar is.
A budgerigar, a small little parrot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And these are an Australian native parrot.
So they're Australian native, budgerigars, and they're also budgerigars that are introduced.
Are they colourful like your lorikeets, rosellas? Is this kind of one of those iconic Australian parrots?
Yeah, so the Australian variety are basically just a green colour, and then you can get other colours. I think Trixie was a blue and white budgerigar.
With the cricket, with it flying down, landing on your shoulder, was this when she entered your life, or this is after you thought you'd lost her and
that
she was
was
coming
after
back
I thought
to
I'd
you?
lost her, yeah, and she obviously was tame and saw me on top of the fence and flew down, landed on my shoulder, and I was like, yes.
Just waiting for you to get high enough that she could see you soaring through the sky.
Exactly.
The interest started young. How did this develop into the business that it is now? So how did you decide to go, well, I love these animals. I like the unconventional animals that you can go out and find. That you like how did you even think that the story of how did you get these newts? Once you were in these circles, did these things kind of happen? Like someone says, hey, I've got these newts.
Well, that was actually, so a friend I played football with, his dad kept them and knew I loved animals, so that's how that came about. As far as the business, I actually, after school, went to La Trobe Uni and studied medical science. I was also very passionate about sport, so I was thinking of going down the physiotherapy line. But after being at uni for a few years, I decided that wasn't going to happen, so I actually went into the pharmaceutical industry.
Okay.
And was a pharmaceutical sales rep for a number of years. And I was living with some friends in an apartment in Toorak, and a friend of mine started an online health business. So I thought, well, I've got some reptiles down in the shed. Why not start Reptile Encounters? So that was about 2007 in my early 20s. And I guess, I saw a need because kids these days aren't getting exposed to the garden skinks and the wildlife that we did growing up because, population growth and fewer people have backyards and technologies come on in a big way, so people are spending more time in front of screens. So there's a real need for young students and kids to connect with nature and the environment because there's evidence that there's health benefits to being in nature and bringing green spaces and all those sorts of things. And we also know that animals have a calming and a good effect on people. So we know they're good for our health. So combining all of that and I guess this need for sustainability and environmental education, it all ties together.
Walking in here, I thought I knew what to expect. I think I was kind of close to what I was expecting, which was kind of very comfortable accommodation for these animals. But this is not where the presentation happens. That's out on the road. But it was very much like you are recreating the habitat quite well, but it's not a zoo. It's like one of those lizard houses at a zoo, but you can also see the exposed back of house.
Yep. Well, so for us, we've got currently probably 15 volunteers. We're going to grow that to 25. We're interviewing at the moment. It gives these guys who want to work with our animals experience in what it would be like to work at a Melbourne Zoo or a Hillsville Sanctuary, and you have a front of house and you have back of house and processes to make sure the animals are taken care of and all those sorts of things. So that's what we're trying to replicate. We're NDIS approved now, so we're going to be looking for probably school leavers that are high functioning, that love animals and maybe are looking to do a TAFE course in animal studies or captive animals. So our facility here will enable them to get some experience with that and follow the processes that they would need to follow if they were working in a bigger institution.
Yeah, you'd be a huge compliment to that process because it's not like a TAFE would be equipped to have live animals of these varieties, of these species.
Exactly.
And so you could work to the standards that they need, but you're also then getting the volunteer sort of workforce through. That's a really good win-win. So has there been interest from NDIS?
Well, definitely. So we've been approved.
Fantastic.
So now we're just looking for support coordinators to get the clients through the door and get that process happening.
Oh, that's very exciting. Some people might be familiar with this concept before of the school program, the people that come to the classroom with the animals, but they might not have much of an idea of what it's like at the back of house, back at the warehouse.
Yep.
So I was really impressed at what I saw today, massively. And obviously, there's been these kind of programs around before in earlier decades, like the idea of, like, and I say I'm going today to interview Josh, who started Reptile Encounters, and people will be like, oh, Reptile Encounters, I think I've heard of that before. It's a concept people are familiar with. But you, Josh, being a young man, this being a new business, how is this kind of quite different than what the traditional mobile zoo operators have been like before? Because straight away, like the facility here, you are getting set up to have people in. This is a lot more biodynamic and enclosures for the animals. This is not, they're being stored until they're being used. This is like they're having a good life. This is a very much like a private zoo recreation here in the facility. So how's it different than what people would expect or what came before this kind of business, what you're doing here?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thing. I guess you don't get into this line of work or this business unless you love the animals. And if you love the animals, well, you want to provide them with the best possible environment, enclosure, whatever you want to describe it as, and provide them with the enrichment that they need. I'm obviously deeply passionate about the environment, about animals, and I guess I like to think big picture. And probably once upon a time, it was more just about bringing the animals in, put a smile on the kids' faces. And there's obviously a lot of positives there, but I want to take it a step further because we need people that are passionate about animals, like Steve Irwin that you mentioned before, because if people aren't passionate about the animals, they're not going to want to fix the issues of the earth at the moment, and it's quite topical with an election coming soon. Climate change, plastic in the ocean, all these issues are really important, and unless kids are really passionate about the environment and nature, they're not going to be motivated to go on and fix those real world problems. So that's what we're all about, sort of making it more than just a one-off incursion or program. It's sort of more of a holistic approach. And so what we're working on is additional resources and partners that we can bring into our program to do that. We want to actually get students out into the field and cleaning up the beach, or surveying the trees for red-tailed black cockatoos, or planting trees for koalas out in the Yugangs. These are all sorts of inclusions that we want to add to our program so that students can actually join the dots and go, all right, this is a gorgeous animal I've met in my classroom. Now I can see why it's important to preserve its environment. Tie it all together. So
that's fantastic, and that's really what we're trying to do here on the show, is talk to people about how whatever else they happen to be doing is intersecting with the times we live in, of the Anthropocene, of climate change, of the need to really start acting positively on sustainability, because even just hitting neutral right now is not enough. We're already seeing sort of locked in runaway effects of things getting worse and worse and worse. So with your decision to open the business, at what stage kind of did the sustainability aspect, outside of the love of the animals, you can't split it out, right? You can't say, I love these individual animals, and then not really give a stuff about the wider species. Like, if you love the animal, you want that to continue. You want that species to be viable and sustainable with enough habitat. So I guess, is it kind of inextricably linked for you, those two, between the love of these animals and then the desire for them to have viable habitat and sort of sustainability in general? Have these been kind of linked from the start?
I guess it's a continuum. You start out and you're obviously just starting to get the wheels in motion and try and get some traction in the market and try and get an audience. And then as you do, everything else just evolves, and as the team grows and the ideas grow, we've sort of thinking really big picture now. What's the full solution for a student going to school? We want them to come out of school at the end of year 12 and be really clear about what's happening, in their city, in their country, with the world. We need to create a generation of really switched on people, so that we can make those changes, because it is pretty scary what will happen if we don't.
Through your love of animals, like everything else kind of comes naturally with that. You can't think, oh, well, who needs forests, but I really love possums and birds, and you can't think that way. So I always kind of like to explore that a little bit, to be like, so how conscious were you of climate change because of the other thing you were involved with? Your passion was just so one-to-one matched with the broader issues of climate change and sustainability. What's it been like trying to share your love of these animals with the students?
It's actually pretty easy, because I just have to be myself, and I often get the feedback that you're so empathetic, and your love of the animals is so evident, and that's just because that's just me. It's just natural. I don't have to fake it. it's just the way it is. Obviously, I'm not going to win over every student, every kid, and you're often fighting an uphill battle because they've got parents that grew up on a farm and learnt that a good snake's a dead snake and those sorts of things.
Yeah,
so
the animals are a product and
or
kind of de-empathizing with animals.
Yep. Well, there's possums in our ceiling, so they keep us awake at night. So therefore, they're vermin or they're horrible. I had a horrible incident at tennis only last Tuesday night. A guy decided to whack a tennis ball at the fence because there was a possum on the fence. I'm like, what sort of person does that? Obviously, people that just completely lack empathy for animals. So, yeah, for me, that's an easy job to go and display that empathy to kids and to make animals that, have been demonised, to make them cool, And generally, I think we're pretty successful. We come away from a program or a show and kids now think snakes are fucking cool. Bleep that out.
It's all right. I can bleep stuff. I like the passion, though. It's true.
Yeah, so we want to make these animals really cool because, that means they're more likely to be empathetic and to do things that are positive for the animal
actually
environment.
Factor those animals into their thinking rather than, us and them or not even thinking about animals at all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so, often I understand I've had possums in the ceiling, it's frustrating, but, you've just got to think, well, we've cut down their trees and now they've got nowhere to go. So, having some empathy there for the animal, I think is really important. So, I think bringing animals into the classroom, it is really positive for the students because, most of the time they haven't seen any of the animals that we bring in. So to have that experience and up close is pretty powerful. Obviously, we've got zoos and we've got great zoos here in Victoria. You can't get as close to the animals and have that same experience. So I think both our programs work in symbiosis. They're both fantastic and both can have positive impacts on people. But we've got the benefit of being there and being the ambassador for the animal in the classroom and really getting our point across that, these animals are important. They're all part of the ecosystem. We can't afford to lose any of them because it all disrupts the whole entire system, and that affects us as human beings. As you were saying before, we need water, we need air, we need all these things in our environment. Otherwise, we're going down the gurgler.
Being exposed to these animals, and then if that does awaken an empathy in you or a wonder, and as you said, a lot of the students, this is the first time they are getting up and close and personal with these animals. Even hearing about them first time, much less seeing them from a distance like a Melbourne Zoo, much less getting to be really up close and touching them. My experience walking around the warehouse with you before sitting down to do this, I heard about species I'd never heard about, got to touch them, and got humped by a wallaby. So that was great. And it wasn't a wallaby. What's the... Patty melons. I'd never heard of them, and now I want one, and now one wants me. So it's the whole thing. I noticed I was at Healesville Animal Sanctuary, a really great zoo here in Victoria, last year, and it was during the bird show. So the wedge-tailed hawk or eagle?
Yep.
Wedge-tailed eagle, 2 meter, 2.5 meter wingspans, amazing bird, swooping really low over my head. And that experience of seeing those animals was going to be such a memorable moment and impactful moment for me already. But then the zoo did the really cool thing of saying, look, if you are impacted by those animals, if you care, and of course you are, here's what you can do to help protect their environment. The toilet paper speech. They said, don't buy these brands. Here's what to look for. Just so you know, these animals are losing their homes, their habitat, their only means of survival for the sake of the dunny roll in your bog because it's non-recycled and it's non-sustainably sourced, and Victoria's old growth is getting thrown into toilet paper. Yeah. And until that moment, I was buying the right toilet paper. Luckily, I was already that far
conscious.
Yeah, because of friends, because of exposure, and luckily because of a bit of social shaming, I was just like, okay, well, that's the right thing. I'm going to spend the extra $1, fine. But that made me then really sympathetic to people out doing tree sits and doing blockades of old growth forest in Victoria that's being logged. People who do tree sits and tree stands, and the exposure to the animals and that kind of that sense of wonder. Is that a really natural on-ramp that people can use to, basically, like you said, become much more aware?
Well, definitely. I think in Australia we're blinded by it because we're the lucky country. Everyone's got rose-coloured glasses and, this deforestation. That's not happening here. Yeah, it does give us a really easy, nice segue into, Australia actually has one of the highest rates of deforestation of the developed world, particularly up the east coast of Australia. The koala of all animals is, at risk of extinction. So if we can't save the koala, well, what hope does the rest of our species have? Definitely an easy segue into that. And people, because you've built that rapport and that relationship, they'll actually hear the message, because they've sat and looked at these animals and been in wonder. And now, they're learning that, no, they're actually dying out in the wild. There's not many left. In Australia, we've got the highest rate of mammalian extinction in the world. And I think 1/3 of all species are at risk of extinction. So there's some really scary stats going on. So obviously people need the knowledge. Knowledge is power. We obviously have to put it across in a way that's not too frightening for young people. We want them to act. And we know that, if they love the animals, they're more likely to act in a positive way and make the right choice, buy the recycled toilet paper, or we use who gives a crap here. So doing those things are more likely to come easy to someone that's empathetic and has a love of our animals.
So you've got a really good tagline for the company. I think what we just talked about speaks to it, but just in case there's more to it.
Inspiration, education, conservation.
So what do those three concepts mean to you in what you're doing here and in what it means to the students, the guests that you get in front of?
Yeah, well, I think, with our programs, that sort of having that one-off moment with an animal, whether it's the woylie or brush-tailed bettong, or whether it's a red-tailed black cockatoo, that's a wow moment. That's a light bulb moment. And so that to me is inspiration. So, when they meet Samantha, the red-tailed black cockatoo, and they realise that she needs a really old gum tree because they have large hollows and these cockatoos lay their eggs in large nest hollows, that kind of is that moment of, I didn't realise, maybe I should be more conscious about my choices when it comes to paper and that type of thing. So that's the inspiration. Education, obviously we're educating about the animal, and that can be the biology of the animal. It might be why they're threatened. So obviously with red-tailed black cockatoos, we talk about the loss of habitat. We talk about the loss of their food. Obviously if they're losing their home, they're losing their food source as well. Potential threats of poaching and other things as well. So that's all education. And then the conservation side is, I guess, we want kids to go away and act. So we don't want it just to be a cool experience. We want them to have to actually take the next step and go, all right, how can I make the world a better place? How can I make Australia a better place? So, ultimately we want to create better humans.
Isn't it amazing that you can create better humans by re-exposing them to nature? Because we have really lost that. And this is the closest I've come to animals outside of my house cat in months. And isn't that just, it's kind of shocking to actually step back and realize, I have not come close to any connection with the natural fauna of the world in the course of my daily existence. That you kind of build up that emotional distance, even if you don't want to, even if you do care about animals, it becomes an abstract care.
Absolutely, it's just a consequence of the way society has evolved and changed, and to actually connect with nature, it's a conscious effort. We have to go, all right, I'm going to go for a drive and we're going to head out to Warrandyte and go for a walk along the river. It's not simply a matter of stepping out into your backyard, because for most of us, we're not fortunate enough to have wildlife in our own backyards anymore. So going back, I guess, to earlier, what was the inspiration? If you think about people like Steve Irwin, his dad was taking him out into the environment, into nature from a young age. That sparked his enthusiasm, his passion. David Attenborough, who I'm a huge fan of, from a young age he was heading out in all parts of the world, tracking down animals and bringing them back to the zoo in London. And while we think that's probably not a good thing to do now, but that built his empathy for the animals, and his love of the animals came from actually interacting with them and bringing them back to the zoo in London. We still think people need to connect and have that connection to nature to do positive things and to make a change. We can look at our first people, the Indigenous people, and how they were so connected and, really had their finger on the pulse with nature, whereas we've really completely lost it. So, I think there's a lot to be learnt from our Indigenous people in regards to looking after our environment and only taking what we need and then, looking after it.
Here's the spot there'd normally be a community corner. The section of the show we make available for community announcements about upcoming events, group updates, news, and general happenings. Instead of that this week, we have an ad. An ad for a podcast app, which is convenient as you're mostly all listening to us on a podcast app. For those of you on Apple Podcasts, the built-in option on your iPhone, that's a podcast app too, and there's more options out there. This app is called Podcoin, and in the last 2 weeks since Climactic became available there, there's been nearly 50 hours of this show listened to. In that time, the people listening earned Podcoin, which is how the app rewards you for your time. Yeah, this app pays you for listening to podcasts. You can redeem the time you spend listening to shows like Climactic for cash at places like Amazon, or you can do like I've done and donate it to charities while rescuing animals, fighting cancer, or removing CO2 from the atmosphere. By doing this ad read, we're extending the length of time we're a bonus show on Podcoin, meaning listening to us earns you more rewards than the normal rate. And that's all we're getting for this ad. No money, no products. Just a way of getting a higher rate for our listeners on Podcoin. I'm a fan, and I've been using the app every day for the last 2 weeks. Get it now and give it a try from Google Play or the Apple App Store. That's Podcoin, Podcoin. A lot within the climate community, I see kind of things as unfortunately quite siloed.
Yeah.
And people might not realize that, like, we're doing a door knocking campaign coming up next week. Maybe we should arrange to go out to Reptile Encounters sometime this week with our 20 volunteers, because this is really going to get them psyched up.
Obviously, if you're stuck in the climate change headspace, it's pretty easy to probably get yourself pretty down and negative. And probably the one nice thing about the animal side of things is it probably balances that out from an emotional perspective. It would help to fill these people up with a bit of passion and motivation for what they're actually doing fighting climate change.
Yeah, it really would, I think. One of the common topics that comes up a lot on the show, we talk to a lot of people about, is that mental care, that self-care, if you're involved with activism, making it personally sustainable as well. And already, I've been in your facility for an hour, and my spirits feel higher, my heart feels fuller, I've got to, pet an amazing Australian native marsupial that I'd never even known existed before today. And it's just it makes you feel good not only about the present that these things exist, but it makes you feel not only normally for me desperate to try to save the future. Now I feel challenged to and called to and privileged to be able to fight for that, because you look in the eyes of a reptile and you're like, wow, we are just a speck of geological time that little Neanderthal, Homo sapien, now human being, us, have been around. This species has been looking out through that eye for millennia. It's humbling. I think that's a good thing. I'm sorry to put so much on the animal side, but we kind of talk about the animal side, I think, in isolation from a lot of things sometimes, but its effect on the human spirit can be really profound.
Oh, absolutely. And for me, one of my favourite animals is probably the saltwater crocodile. And still today, they're persecuted up in Queensland. And it just doesn't make sense to me. This animal has been around for over 200 million years. It's an apex predator. It's amazing. It can grow up to 7 metres. It can weigh over a tonne. What is not to love? That's awesome. And I understand, they are dangerous. But in reality, they kill maybe half a dozen people a year. So...
and those are people who probably weren't where they should have been.
Yeah, probably hung their tail over the sign that says don't go swimming. So half a dozen is not a lot in the scheme of things. There's a lot more things that are going to kill us than a crocodile or a shark or a snake. Okay, so staggers me that people don't respect these animals that might be living in your backyard. To me, that's awesome. I'd love to have crocodiles living in my backyard. A bit tricky down in Melbourne, but if I lived up in Queensland, that would probably be the case.
Make life more interesting for your dog, but I'm sure like the dogs also can be smart enough to figure out, don't go near that thing.
I've got a Staffy. She's not that smart, but we do have some amazing animals, and we just need to show them respect and get this message across to young people that we need to live in harmony with nature and the environment. It's actually critical. And if you take down, say, the saltwater crocodile, it's an apex predator, has a significant cascading effect on the rest of the ecosystem. And I love there's a story about wolves in Yellowstone National Park. So the wolves' numbers were eradicated, and then they reintroduced these wolves back into Yellowstone National Park, and the actual direction of the rivers changed, or the course of the rivers changed because of these wolves. Now it sounds strange, but because they introduced the wolves, the grazing animals now no longer graze where they used to graze because they'd be at risk of being eaten by a wolf. So that allowed the vegetation to regrow, which enabled the banks of the rivers to firm up, which actually changed their course.
With the first mammal extinction not too long ago, directly linked to climate change and rising sea levels in this case, and with that first mammal extinction being in Australia, how hard did that hit in the animal community? And how hard did that sort of hit you personally? Personally, for me, I was worried, and I use it as like a, guys, this you can't deny this is serious anymore.
Yeah.
But I've honestly, I've forgotten the name of the species. It was a small rodent, and the extinction of something. That animal is now gone forever. It didn't hit me nearly as hard as I thought it would, which makes me worry that I'm just more disconnected than I realized I am. Because as soon as I actually say the words out and think about an extinction, that is profoundly disturbing.
I think, though, it's easy to disconnect from that because had you ever seen one of those rodents before?
No.
Did you know what it looked like?
No.
Before it was extinct, did you know what it was?
Never heard of it.
Exactly. So it's easy to go, all right, well, it's not going to change my life at all. For me, what's probably been scarier is what's happened in the Darling River and these fish that are over 100 years of age dying, and what impact that's had on the whole ecosystem in that particular region. That for me is super scary because that's potentially, one of our biggest ecological disasters, and it makes the news for a morning, and then it's basically done. That really worries me a lot. With what we do, we can get out there and we can talk to students and talk to teachers and talk to people about it and raise awareness for these things. It just takes people to get fed up with this inaction for change to happen. And I think more farmers are starting to talk up about the environment, which is a good thing.
Yeah, but when those big moments happen, that are good moments for reflection and kind of should act as a wake-up call. It is a worry when they don't. I know we were outside in your kind of aviary section, and you'd mentioned you've got some flying foxes. They're not here at this site. They're out at a farm. Over this summer, the record-breaking 2018 Australian summer, you had the spectacled flying fox population near Cairns. A quarter of the species in that area died within 2 days because the temperature just didn't get low enough overnight. There's a lack of available water, and flying foxes are falling out of trees. I did see photos of that. That did really profoundly disturb me. And just then hearing it may not be the same particular species, but you've got some flying foxes that you can show students. I was like, yeah, that's good.
We have grey-headed flying fox, and I've been to the Daintree River and done a night cruise along the Daintree and seen the spectacled flying fox flying in at night time to find their roosting spots, and that to me was awesome. Absolutely loved, seeing that. And too many people, I guess, their view of flying foxes is they're smelly and they're carry diseases and so they're persecuted. So therefore, when a quarter of the population dies, who cares? So this is where, getting students at a young age, building empathy, building an understanding that, no, we need flying fox because they're pollinators, and without them, we potentially lose food source for ourselves, and, it has a big impact on the whole ecosystem. So if we can join those dots, Unfortunately for flying fox and climate change, they're very susceptible to temperature rises, so they are at a high risk of extinction. One climate event could wipe out the whole population, which would be pretty terrible. They're probably a good indicator kind of species. We know with climate, if it's too hot, the bats are going to fall
we know
out of the
that
sky.
the species isn't very healthy at the moment, so what is that indicating about the climate?
Yeah.
It's that is a space that I tend to go to. Like personally for myself, I think of, I imagine that worst case scenario, and it motivates me to do more in the present. But yes, say that is the case, that the flying fox population is wiped out. You kind of classify yourself at Reptile Encounters here, or I would, and see if I'm right or not, as a private zoo. You've got facilities here, and but you have the potential to breed captive pairs as well. Are we going to get to this, if you put on your worst case scenario hat, are some of these species that, the environment, the home environment, the native climate is all gone? Is actually seeing some of these species going to become this kind of luxury good, whether it's in public zoos, and thank God they exist, but also in kind of private zoos, for the people who care. This is that flying fox that used to live up in northern Queensland and along the northern coast of Australia, but it's been 20 years now since the last one died. It's, climate just doesn't suit them anymore. They weren't able to migrate south because none of the habitat was right for them south, even though the temperature was. It's not just about being able to move.
Yep.
This the land is not changing as quick as the climate is, and species can't adapt as quick. Can you kind of imagine that worst case scenario, and then can you also see yourself as oh man, I've got the last two or the last handful, or God forbid the last one of a species? Is that possible in your lifetime?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. That was the answer I was scared of getting, but it's this lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of statistics that are thrown around, but one of the most scary is that 2/3 of all wild animals will be gone by 2020, which is now next year.
Yeah.
So
just before we were handling a small is it marsupial?
Yeah, the brush-tailed bettong.
Yep, and there's how many of those?
5,000. Roughly,
I've touched one now, and I'll remember that for the rest of my life.
Yeah, so it won't take much for that particular species to become extinct. One virus or one parasite could easily knock over the rest of the wild population, and then you're down to the remaining animals in captivity. So, yeah, definitely that's something that's scary and highly probable. So if we look at population growth, and the global population is, 7 billion now, and
7.7
heading towards 10.
Yep.
That growth obviously comes at a cost, and that's habitat for animals. We've got to start getting some of it back somehow. So whether it's from agriculture or whatever, and look at more vertical housing systems and more sustainable ways of living, vertical farming, all these sorts of things, I think have to become a real thing sooner rather than later, because even in Melbourne, we're feeling the pressure of population, and our freeways are gridlocked, and all these sorts of things. It's happening now, and the only good thing about that is that hopefully it drives a bit of action. Yeah, I definitely think it could happen, and I don't want it to happen, but yeah, as a bit of a realist, the situation for wildlife's not getting any better anytime soon.
Well, I think you can be very happy with where you are and what role you're playing in the community and in society. That educating young people is probably the most important thing we can do. We've seen, hopefully we see a change in this election cycle, but we've seen countless before, that once society's kind of set, it's really hard to change. But yeah, we've talked about the impact that seeing and interacting and actually being able to empathize with animals and the habitats they represent are hugely important. So thank you for doing what you're doing and educating kids and fixing that education gap we've really got between the people who live on the land and the land itself. We don't know anything close to what we should know about it and how the ecosystems work. Do you feel like you're doing the best thing you could be doing at the moment in this very kind of interesting time, like we're in a mass extinction and you're working in the animal field. Like, does that feel like the right place to be?
Well, for me, it's what I'm most passionate about. And for me, it's how can I scale my impact so that, we're not just impacting a classroom of 25 students, how do I make that bigger? So that's the challenge for us as a business. And for me personally, that's what I'm motivated to solve. You look at someone, an idol of mine, David Attenborough, and you look at planet Earth and go, all right, well, he's impacting 1 billion people. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I want to be able to do. Obviously not tomorrow, but hopefully down the track we can develop out our programs that will have a bigger impact. And yeah, obviously that's beneficial for the environment. The more faces we're in front of and the more kids that we engage and get interested in nature and the environment and motivate to make positive choices is all a good thing.
I've already had, some ideas I've thrown at you about how the rest of the climate community can really leverage you as an asset and break down a bit of this barrier between, I'm a human doing human things in the human system and the animals are over there and the people who care about the animals are over there, but actually bridging that gap. And I hope, people who are listening to this also kind of think, I might have an idea of how we can scale up that impact and that reach. And, here's an idea for a program. And also just that simple act of coming here and seeing these animals and getting to hear you just tell you what it is and what the impact is. It's been honestly a transformative experience for me today coming here, and I hope other people take up that opportunity as well to come. So Josh, we'll probably kind of wrap it up at that point, but do you have any kind of final thoughts there? Or?
No, thanks for coming in. It's been a pleasure to meet you, and I'm humbled that you've had that experience today, and we're open to speaking to people that have similar motivation and passions, and definitely happy to work with like-minded businesses and individuals. So thank you very much.
So as always, on the website of Climactic, for this episode, there will be a guest page for Josh, and you'll have his website, of course, for Reptile Encounters, and hopefully an email address as well. So you can contact Josh really easily and reach out, and I know, I'm thinking of a couple people right now I'll be getting Josh in contact with, and let's really try to ramp up the impact of what he's doing because it's fantastic, and everyone should be having this experience. Thank you very much for your time, Josh.
Thank you, Mark. Cheers.
And thank you so much for listening, folks. It was a real pleasure to bring you this chat with Josh Cox of Reptile Encounters. I'd highly recommend checking them out and getting in touch. The 6th mass extinction has well and truly begun. And I hope to check in more with animal lovers like Josh because it's breaking their hearts. And it personally refills my tank to continue in the fight for the future. Have a great day, keep up the good work, and take care of each other. See you next week for another episode. This has been a production of Climactic, a podcast collective helping local communities tell their extraordinary stories. It's our mission to help elevate the voices of the everyday heroes we're surrounded by, and inspire, sustain, and motivate the climate community. We love working with local environmental groups, individuals, nonprofits, and social enterprises. So if you've got a story to tell, please just get in touch. The Climactic Collective is Mark Spencer, Rich Bowden, Maxine Baisley, Georgia Scheel, and Bronwyn Gresham. Our producer is Hazel Fidicaro. Our digital design is by Rose Fidicaro. Our climactic theme is produced by Greg Grossi, and our logo designed by Abigail Hawkins. We're also pleased to feature the music of the General Assembly. Thank you for listening to Climactic, the podcast for our climactic times.
The Climactic Collective.